Well, good morning. It is Fareed El Diwani here, retired Lincoln's Inn solicitor, Old Square Lincoln's Inn, and it is Thursday, the 21st of September 2023, and this is the second part of my showcase for my recently published book, which is in front of you. Sir Geoffrey Voss, Master of the Rolls at the Royal Courts of Justice, Misconduct in Public Office. The part one of this YouTube broadcast was published yesterday, the 20th of September, and a very good resume in part one. So do go to part one of yesterday if you haven't already seen it and heard it. So I will continue this morning with the story, and I have to say that Islamophobia and basic cheating by Court of Appeal judges has to stop. And again, I'll point to this Racial Bias and the Bench report by Manchester University, November 2022, which alleges institutional racism in the judiciary. As I said yesterday, not a single full-time black Muslim judge at the Royal Courts of Justice, neither is there a single full-time Muslim judge at the Royal Courts of Justice. They're all Oxford and Cambridge educated white people mostly, a couple of Sikh judges as a sop to diversity, but not having a single Muslim full-time judge there is it just goes to show that there is awful prejudice at the Royal Courts of Justice and by those who choose the judges, the Judicial Appointments Commission. So let's go back to this book of mine, Sir Geoffrey Voss. The lack of good faith and lack of integrity in Sir Geoffrey Voss, Lady Justice McClure and Lady Justice Falk, who delivered an iniquitous judgment on me on the 26th of July 2023 when saying that there's no Islamophobic bias from their colleague Lord Justice Popplewell in refusing to condemn me being told to go fuck Allah the Camel, and that the Prophet Muhammad was a confused paedophile, and that Muslims were the root of all evil. Emails sent to me thanks to my Norwegian High Court opponent, Police Sergeant Torrell Sauter. This basic cheating and cover-up by the Court of Appeal was exemplified by the fact that not one of these members of the judiciary now and for the previous 12 years since Mrs. Justice Sharp stated in their rulings the bloody obvious, that Police Sergeant Torrell Sauter was a complete liar for telling Dagbladet newspaper in Norway on the 20th and 21st of December 2005 that I had been incarcerated in a mental hospital for 2 years, from 1992 to 1994. A bit impossible when the whole time I was the commercial property solicitor at the Port of London Authority from 1989 to 1998, and this is the front page of the newspaper here, Dagbladet, in which Torrell Sauter is quoted as saying that I'd spent 2 years locked up in a mental hospital. with my ex-girlfriend there pictured on the front page there, saying that I've been responsible for 23 years of sex terror. A bit difficult for any man on earth to do that. And by the way, that's Heidi Schön there, and this is me. That's me there, admittedly a few years back, and that's me there again. So hardly an ugly bastard that's not fit to be loved by any woman. But unfortunately, when coming across Heidi Schön, little did I know that she had an enduring personality disorder initiated in her adolescence that was impossible to remove, and that diagnosis came from her psychiatrist, Dr. Petter Brock of the Buskerud Psychiatric Hospital in Lier in Norway in 2003. And I am the abused person, very much abused, with filthy sexualized abuse that was covered up and ignored by the solicitors acting for the Ministry of Justice and Police in Norway and Police Sergeant Toril Sauter. Those solicitors were Charles Russell, now Charles Russell speechless, and the sickeningly dishonest and bigoted barristers at 5 Raymond Buildings. David Hurst was the barrister, and at the time it was Mark Warby QC who was head of chambers. Now it's he's become Lord Justice Warby, and he actually oversaw me being struck off from the role of solicitors because of my whistleblowing website norwayuncovered.com, and claims, of course, surprise, surprise, that he has no collection of events from 2011 when his chambers clients were blown up by mass murderer and Muslim hater Anders Breivik in the same week as Mrs. Justice Sharp delivered her ludicrous cover-up of a libel ruling. So a bit of background there for you. So we'll go back to our book on Sir Geoffrey Voss. The fact that Toril Sauter was a proven liar for stating to 2 million people 2 days running in December 2005 that I had been locked up in a mental hospital, coupled with the fact of this pig of a former girlfriend of mine telling the whole country that I had threatened to kill her 2-year-old child. It just beggars belief that the Norwegians print this garbage. They don't even ring me up to ask if it's true. And I get those sickeningly vicious sexualized hate emails that the Essex police declared a hate crime and referred to Interpol Norway, who did nothing, by the way, not a thing. And they wonder why I've got a norwayuncovered.com website exposing the iniquities that the Norwegian state, yes, the state, covered up, and hence their comeuppance, hand of God, call it what you like, divine intervention, instant karma, as John Lennon would say, when Anders Breivik, and there's his book there by a Christian called Sindre Bangstad. He's a good man, Sindre Bangstad, Anders Breivik and the Rise of Islamophobia, detailing the cover-up by the Norwegian state as to their hatred at establishment level for the Muslims, as well as amongst the general public who just think Muslims are garbage. They really do. But Breivik, Breivik was right on a couple of things. That he despaired over the abortion rates in Norway, and he said that you accuse me of being a child killer, yet the Norwegian state has overseen the death of 500,000 children by abortion. And he did pick on the likes of Heidi Schön, who herself had slept with 21 different men by the time she was 21, and had 2 abortions before I met her, and was eventually, after 25 years, I had to wait 1/4 of a century from the first newspaper front page, 13 years of sex terror there. You can see it, 26th of May 1995. That was the first article on me, and a front page, and they, Mr. Justice Saini, in paragraph 65 of his judgment of 2021, declared Heidi Schön to be a liar. So that's paragraph 65. He said that Heidi Schön's stories are far from the truth when he read her effusive love letters to me, even asking for marriage. So that's the effect of being a deeply sick woman who basically betrays truth and justice and turns on men who only had her best interests at heart. I tried and tried with her, turned a blind eye to her transgressions, and yet she still pisses on me to tell the whole country I've threatened to kill her 2-year-old child. A boy I loved dearly. I truly loved that chap, and he liked me. And to tell the whole country that I threatened to kill him with a newspaper quoting me as the half Arab Muslim man is disgraceful. It's beyond disgraceful. It's sick. And yet it was all covered up by the ministry in Norway, Ministry of Justice and Police, and has caused me lifelong damage. And no one gives a damn, I mean, you get websites like Roll on Friday who take the piss out of me, and the Law Society Gazette couldn't give a damn. Barry Baines, another legal commentator who just covers up for Sir Geoffrey Voss and company, and a prosecution by the Solicitors Regulation Authority for bringing the profession into disrepute just because I got a conviction for my whistleblowing website in Norway. The Norwegians didn't want to read about their awful attitudes and laws and the way and the way they behave, these inbred morons in Norway. And at the end of the day, I suppose that's why maybe God in his wisdom decided to cause them huge pain and misery through the actions of Breivik. Of course, those poor souls who died, 77 of them, will be blessed by God in heaven, but it still taught Norway a lesson that you don't start pissing on Muslims year in, year out and expect to get away with it, because they did expect to get away with it, the Norwegians. It's funny how things work out, isn't it? And also Mrs. Justice Sharp, when she completely exonerated Police Sergeant Toril Sauter in her sick judgment of 2011, she thought she'd got away with it, and yet in the same week as her judgment is handed down, my High Court opponents were blown up. The Ministry of Justice and Police was blown up by Norway, including the offices of my sworn enemies, Verdens Gang newspaper. They were blown up too. And the lawyer who acted for the Ministry of Justice and Police in Norway, who instructed 5 Raymond buildings, and Charles Russell, he was in the building and was injured and was off sick for the next 16 months. He told me himself, a chap called Christian Rausch. He's now in private practice. And he and Toril Sauter, basically I taught a damn good lesson indirectly, because Sorter is a liar and a cheat, as has been now proven. But the time limits in Norway for prosecuting her, 5 years, have passed, so they won't prosecute her. And conveniently, they didn't look at that complaint of mine, which I'd sent them in 2006. They didn't look at it until 2019, when, of course, the 5-year time limit for prosecution of Toril Sorter was over. It was too late. Surprise, surprise. So there's another police officer who in England will be sacked for lying about me being locked up in a mental hospital for 2 years. It's funny. The Port of London. I must have had an imposter. Working at the Port of London Authority for a couple of years in my place, and the PLA didn't notice it. So whilst I was languishing in a mental hospital, and not only that, Toril Sorter said my treatment didn't work, and when I came out, I carried on harassing Heidi Schern here, as never before. Worse than ever it was put, and so there we are, representing me as a 2-year section mental patient, plus one who wanted to kill a 2-year-old child, and quoting me as a Muslim, half Arab Muslim, and they wonder why I have a website exposing Norwegian abuse, covered up by 5 Raymond buildings, covered up by Andrew Warby QC, now Lord Justice Warby, who says he's got no recollection of what happened there. No, when your own clients are blown up and 77 people are killed in Norway, you've got no recollection of what happened, have you, Lord Justice Warby? Christ almighty, man, see a psychiatrist. Have some bloody treatment. So let's go back to Sir Geoffrey Voss here, the book. So as a just a resume for people who might be hearing this for the first time, before mass murderer Anders Behring Breivik arrived on the scene in Norway on that fateful 22nd of July morning in 2011, I myself had the dubious honour of being, as already mentioned, public enemy number 1 in Norway from 1995 to 2006 for being a persistent sex terrorist, allegedly, but with 2 fatal additional defects to my persona, well known to Norwegians. I was born a Muslim to an Arab father, Egyptian father, and my grandfather, through my mother's side, fought and died in Stalingrad for Adolf Hitler, 1942. Field Marshal Friedrich Paulus. My sex terror for the first 13 years of my association with ex-girlfriend Heidi Overå from Bergen in Norway, according to the 1995 Norwegian press banner headlines of 13 years of sex terror. Here we are, 13 years of sex terror. Consisted of my alleged regular obscene phone calls, 13 years worth of obscene phone calls, none of which, surprise, surprise, were recorded by the victim, Heidi Schern, as not a single obscene phone call was actually made by me. I was also accused of doing obscene things in front of her, making her watch, and suffering from extreme erotic paranoia, which is a condition where one imagines someone loves you when in fact the opposite is the case. They don't love you at all. I was also accused of constantly telling her what a nasty slut she was, whilst threatening to kill her at regular intervals over that 13-year period, and by 1998 writing 5,840 letters to her. That's a lot of bloody writing, and Those 5,840 letters, by the way, she said she'd all thrown away. So vital evidence not kept, surprise, surprise. And why so? Because they weren't bloody written in the first place. And on top of that, I was accused of having the nerve to tell her that if she didn't convert to Islam, she would suffer torment in the hereafter. Oddly enough, the book that she sent me, trying to convert me to Christianity, was totally ignored, of course, by everybody. She didn't mind Islam at all, but I guess when she met her Christian husband, who spoke in tongues and whose belief is that Muslims are off to hell, she became indoctrinated herself and led an 11-year hate campaign, the worst hate campaign in Norwegian press history against Muslims. I was labelled Muslim 19 times by the Bergens Tidende newspaper in a sex terror article of the 24th of May 1995 in connection with my alleged insanity. And it's very, very hard to take. And those allegations from Heidi Schön of 13 years of sex terror only surfaced at the very end of the 13-year period, which campaign of abuse, the newspaper said, began in 1982, a few months after I met her. The next 3 years of sex terror, from 1995 to 1998, according to the banner headlines of 16 years of sex terror in VG, Verdensgang newspaper, consisted of my exposing to the Norwegian public Heidi Overall's own rampant promiscuity and abandonment to carnal pleasures, 2 abortions before I met her, and sex with 2 different men on the beach in Rhodes in Greece just after I met her, and by 1984 a subtotal of sexual liaisons with 21 different men, coupled with her complaints to me that one Bergen shopkeeper had raped her, that she was nearly gang raped on holiday in Greece, and that her stepmother's father was continually asking for sex and, it seems, blowjobs and handjobs. She had also complained in the civil court in 2002 in my proceedings against her that her 2 sisters mentally abused her and that her stepmother mentally abused her too. In no time at all, I was added to her list of abusers, and in 1986 reported by her to the Bergen police for attempted rape 18 months earlier, but reported her to a mere 2 weeks after I told her father to stop her associating with an on-off lover who was injecting heroin, purchased on a trip to China. That's the father of her child injecting heroin. They had 2 AIDS tests each after the child was born, and the test proved negative. 10 years later, Heidi Overall decided that after all, it was not attempted rape by me, but actual rape. The 2 conflicting witness statements that were with the police were never given to me because under Norwegian law, where there's a conflict of interest for the accuser, witness statements do not have to be disclosed, which is anathema to British justice. They must be disclosed under British law, such conflicting witness statements. So there it is. I couldn't clear my name. 2 conflicting witness statements, one of attempted rape, a decade later the other alleging actual rape. Out of the 1 incident, they were never supplied to me. I asked the police for 10 years to supply them and they wouldn't. By 2005, Dagbladet newspaper reported 2 days running, 20th and 21st December 2005, in these front page banner headlines there. My 23 years of sex terror, they didn't even bother to ring me up to get my opinion before going to print, which is one of their self-regulatory rules, that they must ring someone up before going to print. And of course they didn't bother to do that because there's no enforcement in Norway for breaking those laws. So newspapers were out to get me because of my NorwayUncovered.com website. The Norwegian public had every right to know about my abuser's own sexual history and psychiatric history, coupled with my denial of her ever-expanding catalogue of fabricated allegations. As I said, even Anders Breivik agreed with me on one particular aspect of feminine creativity in Norway. He despised the anything-goes mentality of Norwegian girls and their 1 in 3 abortions. I carried out my duties of payback for those sex terror newspaper libels in all good conscience and with diligent application, determined to give that particular inbred trailer trash contingent in Norway who had vilified me a taste of their own medicine. The fax machine was my weapon of choice, and later on the internet for narrating in Norwegian and English my ex-girlfriend's sexual adventures and the consequences thereof, including her psychiatric treatment. With a sex life like hers, she needed all the therapy and spiritual succour on offer in the mental hospital, but none of it worked, and in 2003 she was diagnosed, as I said, by Dr. Petter Brock of the Buskerud Psychiatric Hospital in Lier as having, quote, an enduring personality disorder initiated in her adolescence. In plain English, she was a total pain in the arse whenever anyone tried to correct her behaviour, and frequently got revenge by made-up stories to get her detractors into trouble. My corrective fax campaign from 1996 to 1998 got me a trumped-up in absentia conviction for harassment of Heidi Schön in 2001, and my NorwayUncovered.com website got me a second conviction for harassment in 2003. I confessed under duress in 2003 after an ambush arrest at the door of the civil court as I was leaving, and was sternly told next morning by the public prosecutor, a lady called Ingun Hodner, to either freely and voluntarily confess my guilt or I will be going straight to prison. And by God, I believed her. She meant it. It didn't matter that I'd been in the newspapers, front pages 8 times to basically 3 million people as a sex terrorist, as a Muslim. No, she said, the public prosecutor said that was a different matter. And I said, no, it's not a different matter. No newspapers, then I wouldn't have put up a website, would I? Oh, no. You're going straight to prison if you don't voluntarily and freely confess. So the Solicitors Regulation Authority prosecuted me for bringing the profession into disrepute because of my 2 harassment convictions. Those bastards at the SRA turned a blind eye to the violent Norwegian Islamophobic sexualised provocation thrust on me and told me I should have gone back to Norway to appeal. Go back to Norway and appeal after that abuse in the press. And then what do I do at the when I appeal? Tell the judge that the public prosecutor has threatened me with prison if I don't confess. I'm sure that will go down well at the Court of Appeal in Norway. Yes, yeah. Will they believe it? Will they think I'm making it up? You know, it's all bollocks for the SRA, the Solicitors Regulation Authority, to tell me to go back and appeal. What, for more front page newspaper headlines? You know, when you've got an Islamophobic country, a far right country like Norway, on a mission of hate like that, you cannot win. So I don't have to fucking well go back and appeal, do I? Solicitors Regulation Authority, and Paul Phillip, who heads it. You're covering up vile sexualised abuse, Paul Phillip, CEO at the Solicitors Regulation Authority. Vile sexualised abuse and hate. You, Paul Phillip, are covering it up. My case in Norway was inappealable anyway, as it was quasi-strict liability in the sense that there was no defence of justified comment under Section 390A of the Norwegian Penal Code. So, my formidable but moronic opponents in the press and police in Norway eventually got more than a taste of their own medicine on 22nd of July 2011, when in the very same week as High Court Judge Mrs. Justice Sharp handed down a ludicrous judgment Anders Breivik did his job and blew up my enemies. I think Mrs. Justice Sharp, when she found out on the 22nd of July of that slaughter in Norway by Breivik, she rushed out her judgment because it came out a mere 7 days later. So Mrs. Justice Sharp has a lot to answer for. The Norwegian police chief resigned. The minister himself, Knut Storberget, also resigned, exhausted from attending so many funerals, and the entire nation of Norway went into deep shock after Breivik's murder spree. The troubling thing, though, as the New Statesman magazine put it, was that the Norwegian public in general admired Anders Breivik for his views on the scourge of Islam and the unwelcome Muslims living in their midst in Norway. That's why he took it out on the governing Labour Party in Norway, because he thought they were letting in too many Muslim immigrants. The Norwegian public recoiled at the horror of Breivik's actions, of course, but the elite Norwegian establishment just carried on as before. Islam was a big no-no, and still is. It was a competing ideology for their anything-goes way of life and crusader mentality. So as I said, it took me 26 years before any judge in either Norway or England declared my former companion, Heidi Overår, later Heidi Schön, in her short-lived marriage, to be a liar. Mr. Justice Saini, a Sikh judge, the British establishment sop to diversity on the bench, wrote in paragraph 65 of his 2021 judgment that Heidi Schön's stories were, quote, far from the truth and no doubt sold for financial reward. The judge Pushpinder Saini had read Miss Schön's effusive love letters to me, which I had fortunately kept, one of them even broaching the subject of marriage, to realise that Miss Schön was lying big time when telling the whole country that there was never any romance between us, and that I had been harassing her and pestering her and threatening to kill her, and much more besides, since the day she returned to Norway after her stay as an au pair in St Albans in Hertfordshire in 1982, telling the press that she could never marry me as I was Muslim, she insisted. As I've said already, the Bergens Tidende newspaper article of 24th of May 1995 called me Muslim 19 times in connection with my insanity, death threats, obscene phone calls, severe erotic paranoia, and year in, year out harassment, transposed into an all-encompassing sex terror by a Muslim who'd written 5,840 letters to her from 1982 to 1998, apparently. A potential child killer, when ironically she'd killed 2 of her own children by way of abortion. So, total horseshit and bullshit by the Norwegian press, sanctioned by the Norwegian state, And that's why they wanted my NorwayUncovered.com website closed down, because I was actually not just illuminating Heidi Schön's own sexual and psychiatric history, I was illuminating the iniquities in Norwegian law, their prejudices and hatreds, and the way they went about their business in general. And that's what really got me prosecuted by the public prosecutor, not so much what I'd said about Heidi Schön. The only reason I met Heidi Overall in 1982 was that she'd come to England to work as an au pair to recover from her second abortion while still at school, to the same, abortion to the same Norwegian boyfriend. His parents, she told me, allowed them to use their own bedroom to engage in their lovemaking, and each time she got pregnant, her boyfriend threatened to leave her if she did not have a termination. Hence, at his trial, Breivik saying that the Norwegian state had killed 500,000 children since abortion was legalised in that country. And Breivik added that the Muslims were not guilty of such an iniquity, as the Sharia, the Islamic law, forbids abortion. Breivik indeed exposed the shallowness of Norwegian youth. He blew up my bitter enemies, and boy, were they my enemies. That's ironic, isn't it? And Breivik no doubt read all about me in those many newspaper articles, and I suspect he named his offshore Antiguan company, used, he said, to launder money. He named that company Brentwood Solutions Limited. Okay, Brentwood Solutions Limited. And I lived in Brentwood in Essex for 35 years. He must have known about me. I sent him a copy of my book, Norway, A Triumph in Bigotry, written under a pen name, Frederick Delaware, after his lawyer told me which prison he was staying in. All those in the Norwegian establishment and the British establishment, the judiciary in particular, who think they can teach me a lesson, could never count on, or did not count on, the power of divine intervention to blow up my sworn enemies. May God have mercy on the souls of those poor people, but it was the pain that came the way of the Norwegian state and the press that was well deserved. So tough shit on all you British people who believed the press and the judiciary, who are still trying to protect the Norwegian state. So how did things kick off with the Norwegian press? Something that was mentioned in the Sir Geoffrey Voss judgment of July 2023. I have always detested cheating. Accusing a man of rape when it is not true is one of the most despicable forms of cheating going, and certainly worthy of being punished severely. Occasionally, a woman who has fabricated such an allegation ends up in prison for 12 months for trying to pervert the course of justice. This was highlighted about 15 to 20 years ago by the British press, when a Norwegian woman, surprise, surprise, got a British man into trouble for alleging rape, and it wasn't true, and she got 12 months in prison. So you can look at those newspaper articles on my website, Norway News Clips, on NorwayUncovered.com. In my case, as soon as I discovered via a Norwegian lawyer in March 1995 that Heidi Overall had reported me for attempted rape, in revenge for my writing to her father telling him to do something about his daughter sleeping with her on-off abuser boyfriend who had been injecting heroin, as soon as I got that letter from my lawyer disclosing that she'd made this foul and false allegation of attempted rape against me, I was determined to teach her the biggest lesson of her life. For years, anyway, she'd been abusing me and behaving atrociously. She turned into a delinquent, a monster. Asking me to help her with her self-inflicted problems, and as soon as she got over her latest trauma, she reverted to type and started behaving like the complete arsehole she'd become after returning to Norway in 1982 from a stint as an au pair. In the summer of 1984, when I resumed contact with her over the phone and by letter, she told me she had recently tried to take her life after discovering her latest boyfriend, the one injecting heroin, had been cheating on her again, and the shock had made her miscarry the twins she said she was carrying. She was an extraordinarily beautiful girl, gorgeous, but I myself had had no sexual relations with her in England in spite of her invites to stay the night with her in bed. She was on the pill just in case, she told me. I must say, of course, I was tempted, but was put off by the act of partaking in sexual intercourse with her due to her having had those 2 abortions. It was a real intercourse passion killer. As when, one would look at her private parts, I knew I would be visualising the ripped to shreds fetus coming out of her vagina at the hospital, and that is not conducive to good sex. She was used goods, and in any case, as a Muslim, I was still to have sex with any woman. So, after being told of her attempted rape allegation, designed no doubt to get me into serious trouble, I wrote down her full sexual and psychiatric history in 1 sheet of A4 and paid £95 plus VAT for it to be professionally translated into Norwegian. Then, by post, I sent it to every adjoining neighbour of hers in the places she had lived in Bergen and Drammen. This was a lesson that simply had to be taught. One of those information sheets I sent out was received by a Norwegian journalist in Bergen, who then interviewed Heidi, who then performed another one of her insane acts of trying to pervert the course of justice by telling the mainstream press, who printed it without even calling me up to ask if it was true, that I was a 13-year sex terror abuser of her with severe psychiatric problems who had threatened to kill several people in Norway and written hundreds, later thousands of abusive letters to her, and was constantly coercing her to convert to Islam. As I said, she'd recently married a Christian fanatic who told me over the phone, "Come to Jesus, Allah doesn't exist," and proceeded to speak to me in tongues for over 2 minutes, which he did admit it to in court in Drammen in 2002. So, incredible stuff. My lawyer in Norway sent me the newspaper cuttings, which a Norwegian banker working in London translated for me while sitting on a bench in the street by his home in Wapping. Significantly, for all this supposed sex terror harassment for 13 years, I was never prosecuted in Norway. The police did not believe Heidi, and I recorded all my calls with the police, by the way. They're on my website. And by 1998, the police told me, and Heidi Schön, there will be no prosecution of me for my 35 or so letters that I had sent her past and present neighbours detailing her rampant promiscuity as punishment for a fabricated allegation of attempted rape. Contrast that with the Norwegian civil courts, who in 2003 believed Heidi and accepted there were 13 years of sex terror, all on her word alone. Talk about total xenophobic bigotry from the Norwegian judge, who even gave me a telling off for calling Police Sergeant Toril Salter a liar. A more bent police officer one could be hard-pressed to find. In England, 20 years later, Mr. Justice Saini did not believe Heidi and said so in his judgment. He also knew that I had not been locked up for 2 seconds, leave alone 2 years in any mental hospital, and by implication, he he realised that Police Sergeant Torrell Sauter was a liar, but to save face for the Norwegian police and government, he didn't say so explicitly in his judgment, which is a shame, because a judge shouldn't fear offending countries or governments when they're wrong. So simply after those first 1995 newspaper articles, all I did was ask the Norwegian papers for an apology. That's all. It's all it took, an apology, so they all refused. So I responded by faxing to random members of the Norwegian public my corrective information sheets, which I read out to you in my previous broadcast yesterday. It was acknowledged by the Norwegian courts that what I'd said about my abuser Heidi Schön was all true. I hadn't lied about anything. No point lying. So you can read the whole story on my website, buy my book, Norway, A Triumph in Bigotry, and you can read the similar stories with my books for sale on Amazon about Mrs. Justice Sharp, Lady Justice Sharp, and Lord Justice Popplewell. It's great reading and you know, a major contribution to the iniquity of the Norwegian government in their behaviour. Eventually, Stig Lund, a very hard-working lawyer from Moss in Norway, twice missed the time limits to issue applications against Heidi Schön, who I was suing for libel, and my efforts to obtain justice dissolved into thin air. Missing time limits, poor Stig Lund missing time limits had lost me everything. It was a crushing blow, as we were going to create new case law at the Supreme Court in Norway in relation to the role of the Norwegian Press Complaints Commission. You know, I mean, the tricks of the Norwegians are really sickening. On arrival in Norway for the Civil Court of Appeal hearing in 2003, the promise from her lawyer of 4 hours cross-examination was ignored by the judge, as Heidi was now conveniently found by him to be too distressed and mentally afflicted to face any cross-examination at all. So the hearing at the Court of Appeal in Norway was now a complete waste of time. Heidi's truths when giving evidence, she was allowed to give evidence, but I was stopped from cross-examining her on that evidence. So she tells the judge that I told her I was a Shia Muslim, when of course I was a Sunni Muslim. And at the time, being a Shia was regarded in Norway at the time as being 2 steps removed from being a Satanist. You know, the connection with Iran. Iran wasn't flavour of the month in Norway at the time. Heidi was deliberately trying to blacken my name, as she knew Iran, the home of Shia Islam, was receiving a terrible press in Norway at that time. Apparently, I also regularly rang her up asking what colour underwear she was wearing, and once told her that if she did not let me kiss her and touch her breasts would fall off. Yes, you heard me. Fall off. Her breasts would fall off. So I couldn't cross-examine her on any of this because she was too mentally afflicted to be cross-examined. I was never given any witness statement from her at any time for any of her new evidence or even the old evidence, which was sprung upon me, as in an ambush. All I could tell the judge was that she was lying. In civil cases in England, witness statements are always provided to give one's opponent an idea of what he or she will be facing. And as for her 13 years of sex terror allegations made in the press, the fact was there was no communication whatsoever between us from 1982 to 1984, no communication from 1991 to 1995, and she had no phone from 1988 to 1993, making it therefore impossible to make 13 years of continuous obscene phone calls. So I hadn't made a single obscene phone call. So there we are. Just continuous abuse all along. And a living hell. So my NorwayUncovered.com website got me a 6-month suspended prison sentence in Norway in the autumn of 2003 for so-called harassment under Section 390A of the Norwegian Penal Code for disclosing on the website Heidi Schön's sexual and psychiatric history. It mattered not that I was described as a sex terror Muslim psychopath, an insane psychopath suffering from severe erotic paranoia, who'd inflicted 13 years, then 16 years and 23 years of sex terror on Heidi Schön. I was not allowed to describe her sexual and psychiatric history, as that was harassment of her. So total hypocrisy from the Norwegian state, all condoned by Sir Geoffrey Voss and colleagues, as he said that they can't look behind the convictions or unpick 28 years of Norwegian history. So there we are. They just, Sir Geoffrey Voss just covers up to protect Mrs. Justice Sharp, and ignores the fact that my second conviction anyway was obtained under severe distress. There was nothing voluntary at all about my confession of guilt. Why on earth, Sir Geoffrey Voss, you should do what you've done? You're a judge. You're supposed to stand up for the truth and justice, and yet you cheat. It's no other word to describe your behaviour. Even the sad thing was that the Solicitors Regulation Authority offered me, by way of what they called an agreed outcome, a suspension from the profession for 3 years. And I rejected that punishment as being too harsh, as not only was it a long time to be out of the profession, not working as a solicitor, but a 3-year suspension would give the public the impression I'd done something badly wrong. So I turned down the SRA's offer of a 3-year suspension. Even when I was struck off later on, it was done on a complete misunderstanding of the evidence. The Solicitors Disciplinary Tribunal struck me off in 2019, refused to read a single one of the 22 press articles on me, which I said you can read from my website, because I had not got the technical expertise. I told them to upload the press articles onto the Solicitors Regulation Authority's case lines portal, a special portal they had to put your evidence on. I said I just don't have the expertise to upload it, so please read them from my website. And when I got to the hearing, they then told me they hadn't read a single one of them because I hadn't uploaded it onto their SRA portal. So I told them again, I haven't got the bloody expertise to do it. And in any case, I told them time and time again in my witness statement that Miss Schön, Heidi Overall, Heidi Schön, was pictured and quoted in the newspapers for the whole 12-year period of her press rant. Now, this is, here we are, the newspaper from 1995 on Drammen-Tiden, the newspaper. There she is, harassed for 13 years. There we are, see, with a picture of her with her little dog. All right, so there she is on the front page, and she's quoted throughout. This is 13 years of sex terror, Verden's gang. Pictured and quoted throughout. And it carried on in every newspaper for the next 12 years, and we end up 2005 there, pictured and quoted throughout. So what do the solicitors disciplinary tribunal say when striking me off in 2019? They say that Heidi Schön told nothing to the press. Can you believe that? The SDT decide that Heidi Schön told nothing to the press. They said that none of the press information emanated from Heidi Schön. That's the quote in the SDT judgment. None of the press information emanated from Heidi Schön. And these tricky little bastards at the SDT, they didn't tell me that was their thinking or their ruling before they struck me off. They only told me that after they struck me off. So if they told me their thinking before they struck me off, I would have told them that your reasoning, your finding is completely wrong, because she is pictured and quoted for the entire 12-year period in the newspapers. And you can see for yourselves, people now looking at it, why I insisted they look at those articles from my website. And there it is. She, Heidi Schön, was the leader in the worst Islamophobic hate campaign in Norwegian press history. All ignored by the Ministry of Justice and the police, who knew what was going on in Norway. All ignored by the solicitors, Charles Russell Speechley, acting for the Norwegian Ministry, and 5 Raymond Buildings, the barrister David Hirst, who knew full well I had not spent 2 years locked up in a mental hospital as alleged by his client. He had my family doctor's letter before him, before the case started. He knew his client was a liar, but still proceeded to go along with the fact that I was mentally ill. David Hirst even added his own little bit of diagnosis, saying that my litigation in Norway, my suing my opponents for those vile libels, was a symptom of my mental illness. Okay? And saying it was, that it was harassment. My litigation was actually harassment of my opponents, and the fact that I was suing his client, Police Sergeant Torrell Sauter, was also harassment. So what a bastard of a thing to do, David Hirst and 5 Raymond Buildings. And you, Lord Justice Warby, were head of chambers at the time, and yet you excuse everything because your barristers are self-employed and you're not responsible for anything they do, conveniently, whereas in a law firm, a solicitor's office, the partners are responsible for everything their employee solicitors do. But you, the barrister side of the profession, you have everything tied up completely, don't you, in your favour. That there's no way of ensuring that you take responsibility for the scumbags that work for you, bigots like David Hurst, who knew I'd been told to go fuck out of the camel, and that been told the Prophet Muhammad was a confused paedophile, been told to lick the arseholes of pigs clean before eating them, told that Muslims were the root of all evil. Emails that your barrister David Hurst knew I'd received and yet still tells me I'm mentally ill for suing his client for her lie to the whole country that as a Muslim I was sectioned for 2 years in a mental hospital. You know, you people, Lord Justice Warby, Sir Geoffrey Voss, Lady Justice Sharp, Mrs Justice May, Lord Justice Bean, Mr Justice J, all of you have arbitrated on this same case in different satellite litigation. You are a disgrace to the judiciary. You are bigots. You ought to resign. I know you won't, but you ought to resign. But one day your time will be up. You'll be old, you'll retire, and you will, thank God, be forgotten. And then you'll have to face God on Judgment Day, as we all do. Don't we all long to see our loved ones, the people we've lost and we won't see again on this earth? We know only God can help us in this desire of ours to see the people we've loved again. And that is why we've got the racial bias and the bench report from November 2022 accusing you, the judiciary, of institutional racism and Islamophobia, which no one takes any notice of. I suppose that report is totally without merit. Yeah? You've got away with it again. Sir Ian Burnett, for 4 years as Lord Chief Justice, has ignored my letters with Lord Pickle's letters. He's now resigned, age 65, as Lord Chief Justice, to be replaced by Lady Justice Carr. At least he wasn't replaced by the favourite, Lady Justice Sharp. That is a blessing. That is God's blessing. That Lady Justice Sharp is not going to be the next Lord Chief Justice. So the Solicitors Disciplinary Tribunal, John Colin Chesterton and Gerald Sydenham were the two solicitors sitting on the panel, and Carol Valentine was a lay member. They said that as Heidi Schern had told nothing to the press, that nothing emanated from her, I deserve to be struck off the roll of solicitors for my total lack of insight into sending out corrective press, so-called press releases, information sheets to the general public in Norway, disclosing her own psychiatric and sexual history. Okay, they said I took my wrath out on the wrong person. It was the press who wrote the stories on me, and Heidi Schern had nothing to do with the stories the press wrote. Therefore, as Barry Baines, legal commentator, put, my complete lack of insight meant I deserved to be struck off, because I didn't, I had no idea what I was doing. Trouble was, it was all total crap. Heidi Schern had been quoted and pictured in all the newspaper articles, and the SDT were completely wrong to strike me off. That was the one cogent reason they gave for me being struck off. So what happens at the... I appealed to the administrative court, confident that I would easily win and get reinstated on the roll, because as Heidi Schern was quoted and pictured for 12 years, the SDT reason for striking me off was wrong. So 3 days before the hearing, the Solicitors the Solicitors Regulation Authority offer me a rehearing before the Solicitors Disciplinary Tribunal and another one, because they obviously thought I had a good point for not being struck off. Because they thought maybe that it was permissible for the Solicitors Disciplinary Tribunal to look behind the convictions. But I refused that offer of a rehearing, much to the fury of a barrister who later advised me, because it's often the case that before the hearing the SRA just allow you to carry on as a solicitor with an agreed outcome, maybe a suspension of 6 months or something, But I trusted the judiciary. I trusted Mr. Justice Saini to allow me to remain on the roll of solicitors, because Mr. Justice Saini's role in adjudicating on a hearing was to review the judgment of the Solicitors Disciplinary Tribunal, review it and not rehear the whole case. So in reviewing it, I was confident that he would see that the only reason for me being struck off was wrong, because Heidi Schern was pictured and quoted for 11 years. And so the information had come from her. She was the leader on this hate campaign. It was a Muslim hate campaign, given the vast number of times they'd named me Muslim, the Norwegians. And therefore my own corrective information sheets were not a step too far, and I had every insight into what I was doing. It was just my response. The only explanation for what Heidi Schern had done was that she was mentally ill herself. She was a registered mental patient, which the press never printed in Norway. What man can possibly write 5,840 letters? What man can do all the criminal acts that were ascribed to me? It's impossible. So basically, I did not deserve to be struck off. But what did Mr. Saini do? He said that Heidi Schern was vulnerable and fragile and had lived a difficult life. He said that without telling me beforehand during the hearing what his feelings were. So then I would have corrected him to say, look, during the 13-year period of her press rant, those 21 articles from 1995 to 2006, she was not fragile. She was not vulnerable. She was married from 1993, living a stable life. Her past was forgotten to a large extent, and she was free to speak to the press, giving her tissue of lies, vile lies, and therefore she was not fragile or vulnerable anymore. She was no longer living a difficult life, and she never lived a difficult life in the first place. She enjoyed her sex life with many different men. Sleeping with dozens of men is not regarded as a defect in character in Norway, because, vast numbers of girls in Norway sleep with as many strangers as possible. They enjoy their sex lives, and they have no religious instruction that sex before marriage is wrong. So they get on with it, and they use their precious youth, the young years of their lives, to have as much sex as possible with as many different men as possible. It's not regarded as having a screw loose to sleep with dozens of men. And Heidi overall was no different. And I did tell her, you've got to stop these. You've got to stop this behaviour. If men cheat on you and piss on you, then have the strength of character to leave them. But she couldn't. She was obsessed. She was obsessed with, certain men and couldn't stop having intercourse with them. And if you got pregnant, who cares? I'll go and have an abortion. Many men will be appalled to find out their girlfriends went behind their backs and had an abortion. They long to have a child. They long to have that little baby in their arms and kissing and cuddling him, looking forward to him growing up. And that's why, people like Susie Quattro, the rock guitarist, who lives in Essex here near me, she went to the press and told them how deeply she regrets having an abortion and how she longs to see that son she aborted or that child she aborted. People don't understand that women who do have abortions severely regret it later on. It's nothing at the time to them. And later on, when they realise how difficult it is to have children, the process involved, they severely regret it. And that's why Breivik had a point. Anders Breivik had a point about Muslims forbidding abortion, as do the Jews. The Jews in particular are very strong on being anti-abortion, and indeed I've highlighted on my NorwayUncovered.com website, it's called The Case of the Protesting Jew, when a poor, unfortunate Jewish fellow, a Norwegian, tried desperately to stop his girlfriend having an abortion. He tried everything under the sun, even went to the European Court of Human Rights, but it was no use. The girl had an abortion because she simply changed his mind. Changed her mind. I do not want to marry a Jew. So that poor man, that poor unfortunate Jewish gentleman lost his child that he was so looking forward to. The distress that is caused by abortion is immense and covered up today by the state. So, Mr. Justice Saini struck me off the roll, and that was endorsed by Lord Justice Warby, because for different reasons as well by Lord Justice Warby, he misread the Norwegian conviction verdict from 2001, thinking I had sent 200 of my information sheets to Heidi Schön. I had not sent 200 to her. They were sent to the general public. It's the and or others wording that Lord Justice Warby did not read properly. They were sent to the general public, not to Heidi Schön. So you're wrong to say I have sent them to Heidi Schön. And of course, because Lord Justice Voss did not want to unpick 28 years of Norwegian history, he didn't bother to have the integrity to say either that I did not send 200 messages to Heidi Schön. So you basically have cheated Lord Justice Warby and Sir Geoffrey Voss If I weren't Muslim, there would have been no newspaper articles. And therefore, with no newspaper articles, I would have had no need to put up a website or send out my corrective information sheets. Therefore, there'd have been no prosecutions, no convictions, and no being struck off. It's only because I'm Muslim that I have been struck off. And you have covered it all up. Can't look behind the convictions. Can't this, can't that. Are bound by this precedent. Are bound by another precedent. We don't want to unpick 28 years of Norwegian history. And if you don't want to search for the truth, don't become judges, all right? Your iniquities need to be exposed by people like me. So, even the order of a good woman, a good judge like Lady Justice Andrews, giving me the chance to redeem myself from not being struck off. She thought it, by her order, her 2023 order, she thought I should have another chance to put my case. 19th of January 2023 it was. Order made by the Right Honourable Lady Justice Andrews, DBE. She thought it was a serious matter that I shouldn't be struck off without just cause. She'd read all my arguments, and basically, if she didn't think they had any merit, she wouldn't have allowed me to go forward to the Court of Appeal. I can't think she was setting me up. I can't believe that. So, when I get to the Court of Appeal, all the arguments I've put to Lady Justice Andrew that she accepted or seemed to accept were dismissed. So what is going on at the Court of Appeal? Why don't you have some respect for what Lady Justice Andrews has said in her order? What the heck is going on with you people? Sir Geoffrey Voss says that David Hurst at 5 Raymond Buildings in 2011 has done absolutely nothing wrong. That is a total perversion. You know that in saying that you're protecting Lord Justice Warby, who has still strong connection with 5 Raymond Buildings. How on earth can you say David Hurst did nothing wrong? He knew his client was lying, saying I'd been locked up for 2 years in a mental hospital. He knew she was the one that caused those hate emails to be sent to me. I cannot be clearly mentally unstable for calling Police Sergeant Torrell-Salter a liar, cheat and an abuser, for saying that I'd been locked up for 2 years in a mental hospital. As I had not been locked up for 2 seconds, then Torrell-Salter is a total liar and cheat. David Hurst knew this, yet he has the nerve additionally to argue that I am particularly mentally ill. I am severely mentally ill simply for suing his client and suing the newspapers in Norway. He didn't express a word of regret over the hate emails that I read out to Mrs. Justice Sharp. I only got them because of what Police Sergeant Torrell-Salter and Heidi Schern told the press. So, for you, Lord Sir Geoffrey Voss and Lady Justice McClure and Lady Justice Falk, to say that David Hurst did absolutely nothing wrong is garbage. You sicken me. How the hell can you get away with that? How do you have the nerve to say that? Because you're protecting the upper echelons of the bar and judiciary. And I come back again. Racial bias and the bench report. You don't like it, do you? You don't like being accused of being institutionally racist or Islamophobic. If someone like me writes in simply asking a judge to condemn me being told to go fuck under the camel, then I expect a condemnation. What the hell do you think the Muslim community think in this country and worldwide? They're not going to take kindly to you protecting Islamophobic bigots. So, just, you're not going to resign. You ought to resign, all of you. But in the future, I hope a new generation of judges can have a completely different attitude to minority communities in this country and black people who don't have the money to defend themselves. Certainly in civil matters, they won't prosecute, but they are taken advantage of. Okay, a lot of them are, have gone the wrong side of the law, but a lot of them haven't. And this bullshit, even the Stephen Lawrence matter, the trouble that poor mother, Mrs. Lawrence, has had for decades, with cover-up by the establishment and the Met Police, who are cleaning their act up now. They've got a commissioner now who's doing well. But, the Court of Appeal themselves turned down applications for overturning convictions that are totally unjust. You did it with Andrew Malkinson recently, who'd spent 19 years in jail for a rape that he didn't commit, and in 2006 turned down his appeal. And who was one of the judges in 2006 who turned down that appeal? Mr. Justice Bean, now Lord Justice Bean. Lord Justice Bean is 100% an Islamophobic bigot. You are an enemy of mine and always will be. And shame on you for supporting Islamophobic sexualized abuse. This is the end of my broadcast. I'll be doing more in the future on each of my books. So until then, all the best, community. And let's look forward to Tottenham Hotspur doing very well this season. And let's look forward to watching Uriah Heep on their tour with Saxon and Judas Priest come March, ending at Wembley Arena. All the best. Bye-bye.